started here in just a minute. I hope for those who've been sitting out here for a while, hope you've had a chance to see some of these great overheard at Hillbrook quotes, which are from real student quotes from real students on our campus. My favorite is I like school more than Target, and I love Target. I don't know that we can use that as our new tagline, but it's catchy. The other one there's several of them that are cute. The other one, the kid winks, and that's a change maker wink for you. Now you have to go do something changey. So it is so great to see everybody. Welcome to the State of the School. It's the first time we have done the State of the School in the spring, and it's the first time we've done it in the amphitheater. And as far as I know, it's the first time we've done it with wine. So this, there's a lot of positives tied to today's event. It's really great to see all of you here, and hello to all of the people who are on live stream. We're really grateful that you're joining us as well. I wanted to thank Misty and Dave from Oren's Hummus, who donated the food. Please continue to enjoy that. Just so people have a sense of the event, I'm going to talk for 30 or so minutes, and then we will have an opportunity to have some more food, have some more wine, and then you'll also have a chance. We have a series of tables that are behind me, and I'll talk a little more about them afterwards. But senior leaders will be at different tables, and a chance for you to kind of ask additional questions and dive a little deeper into topics that are interesting to you. So for those who've never been to a State of the School, the idea for this event is to really kind of highlight some of the things that have been happening at school this year, talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we have underway, and then lay the foundation for some of the things in the future. And so one of the things I wanted to start by today was just kind of going through some of the highlights, which are things that we've always done, but all of a sudden this year felt a lot more special when we were able to do them. And of course, things like Friday Flag, which actually, to be clear, Friday Flag used to be Monday Flag. It was Monday Flag forever, but it's quickly become Friday Flag. But that's not the part that's interesting. Obviously, this year we've been able to bring Flag back in person, and now we have the whole community joining together in the amphitheater, and it has just been so great to have students back, to have families back on campus. If you haven't been on campus, we're having a growing number of families joining us on Friday morning, so we encourage you to come and join us for Flag. There is no better way to start your day than by hearing a bunch of student updates, and then also, of course, finishing with jokes. And the picture on here of Bastian, who's a junior kindergartner, still one of my favorite all-time Flag moments on the first day, for those who may have seen it. When he called him up, and he was telling the first joke of the year, and it took at least a minute to get him to say anything. And I was sitting there, and he was sitting there, and I was like, I don't know if we're ever going to end. And there was like 500, all these people watching, and he finally yelled out pickle pie, bowed, and sat down. It was quite the way to start the year. But the other thing I want to mention, and this is connected to Flag, is our Hillbrook Student Council. And Hillbrook Stuco has really evolved in the last couple of years. And I want to give a big shout out to Clara No. For those people who don't know Clara, Clara is our, she's the hub design teacher, and also she's the faculty lead for Stuco. And she does an amazing job of making Student Council a student-run experience. And so for those who've seen Flag, if you go back a number of years, there were always students who were helping with Flag, but for the most part, I kind of ran Flag, and it felt very adult-driven. And over the last 2 years, it has evolved so that I show up on Friday morning, they run it. Like they have the computer over here, it has the whole run of show, and they literally walk up to me right before I'm supposed to go on. They're like, hey, Mr. Silver, it's your turn now. It's the best. Like they are fully running this show, and that's what you want. Like that's what you want. And again, all types of other interesting things as well. There was the talent show, and then there's been increasingly ways that they're finding to really engage the community. So those two things have been such a wonderful both shift in terms of some of the ways we're doing things, but also just that reconnection with our community. Halloween. I actually wasn't here for Halloween, but Halloween, from everything that everybody's told me, was amazing. And the wonderful combination of Halloween and the Fall Festival, which I suspect might become a new tradition. Let's just do everything at once in one day. So that was a really wonderful day, and again, one of those opportunities for both student council, but also for parents. We had a lot of parents who helped out on that day. eighth grade musical, class of 2022, did a fabulous job with You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, just a few weeks ago. It's funny, things feel so, at this time of year, there's so much happening. It feels like it was so long ago, but it was only like 4 weeks ago. But they were wonderful. And that was Vanessa Holmes-Silberman, who was the musical director. Again, a theme that you're going to keep hearing, did an amazing job of really empowering students to run that show. And to be clear, there were lots of adults who were providing support for that. But on the actual night of the show, there was a group of us, we do our little faculty cameo. And when we were backstage, we were the only adults backstage. It was entirely student run with adults backstage. I mean, with only the few of us who were doing the cameo. So again, a wonderful event, a return of an amazing tradition. On the adult end, the benefit was spectacular. A shout out to Kev and Gina who chaired that, as well as a number of you in this. There were so many people in this community who stepped up to help with this event. We raised the money we needed to raise. We raised over $500,000 to support flexible tuition. We also had a really fun night. It was the first time we'd really come together as a community. It was the largest crowd we had at a benefit. And then also, I do want to thank the Yorks and the Guidos, who also made it possible to have Levi's Stadium, which was in an out-of-the-world location. And it really did, as you know, we talk about the theme of endless dreams, the magic of thinking big. It was a great moment to think big as a community about our future. HSPC, Meg Galley, where's Meg? A big shout out. Meg Galley has been president of HSPC this year, and has really helped us as we, this theme of bringing back and starting to do increasingly some of those typical things that we do. Should I keep going? I think we're having sound issues. I don't know if I can hear it a little bit. Anyways, but so hopefully people can hear us. So as we reconnect with a lot of these typical events, for those who don't know, HSPC does so much to help our community. Everything from grade level parents to all types of events. Obviously there's the benefit, but the art show, fall festival, grandparents and special friends day. I'm gonna leave some out, but there's all the different events that happen during the school year. Faculty staff appreciation efforts every year. That's probably something that a lot of parents don't know about that means the world to our employees as parents come together to help recognize the amazing teachers and staff at the school. Affinity groups. Okay, we're gonna switch. Hold on one moment. Hello? Seamless. Nobody saw that, right? And then admission ambassadors. So again, and as I look out in this crowd, I know almost every single one in this crowd I know has done something with HSPC this year. Some of you are former presidents. So thank you so much, and to HSPC for providing all of that support that is so invaluable for our community. And then on the student side, just a few weeks ago, right before spring break, we brought back Reach Beyond Week. There's a whole series of Reach Beyond experiences, and I won't go through all of them, but some of the highlights in it, if you haven't, there was a Peacemakers group that was talking about ethics, and they ended up their Reach Beyond Week on Friday out in front of our town hall in Los Gatos, sharing little zines about ethical decision making and connecting with some members of our community. There was the Asian American experience, which was a wonderful Reach Beyond Week that combined a lot of parent involvement. And so we had representation from Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian, lots of different families, and then also a number of teachers representing some of their ethnic heritage. And it was just an amazing experience. Students had dancing, they learned how to, they had all types of different food, they visited different locations. The circus, a number of you might have been here to see the circus, which was on this stage. On the Friday, we had a chance to highlight a circus. And then there were some trips that were travel. And so we had a group who traveled down the coast as part of something called Food, Farms, and Fashion, and where they were kind of seeing the connection between organic farms. They went to an organic farm, bought some food, used that food to make dinner. They also went to Patagonia to learn a little bit about sustainable fashion. Another travel group was a group to the Teton Science School, where they got to spend time in Yellowstone and really understand like ecological field science practices, early history of national parks, and the highlight we heard from that one was that they saw moose that were walking within like 20 feet of the dorm that they were staying in. And then there was a group that went to Chicago and Detroit and to really talk about urban renewal and to understand cities. All of these things that are tied together, it's hands-on, real-world learning with the potential to impact people and planet. And the other pieces, they're all collaboratively designed and they're choice-based. And so they really represent the best of what we are offering as a school. They are academic experiences, but they're so much more than that. And so Reach Beyond Week is something that really sits at the core of the school. And over the last couple of years, as we haven't been able to do it in quite that way, it was such a great moment to be able to bring back like a full Reach Beyond Week. So I'm going to pivot now and talk a little bit about some of the strategic initiatives and some of the things that we as a school are working on. And I always want to ground that in our vision as a school. You know, one of the things about independent schools is that we each have our own unique vision, mission, and core values that draws you into this community. And so at Hillbrook, we inspire students to achieve their dreams and reach beyond themselves to make a difference in the world. And as I often say, there's the two parts to that. The first part of that is inspiring students to achieve their dreams. It's providing students with the knowledge and the skills and the confidence to be able to do anything they want to do. The second part of that is reaching beyond to make a difference in the world. And we think that's equally as important. You know, really raising children to be able to do anything they want to do, and then helping them recognize that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so that as they grow up and as they're thinking about ways that they can be in this world, they can think about ways that they can really make a difference in this world. So one of the questions then that drives us, that we're always talking about, is how do we ensure that our program remains evolving, relevant, and in line with research-based best practices? So, you know, how do we always stay at the leading edge of what good schools are doing and making sure that we're reflective? So I want to talk about two different ways that we do that. One is through the accreditation process. And so as hopefully people know, we're accredited by the California Association of Independent Schools, which is a very rigorous and challenging accreditation and involves really the best independent private schools in the state. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the other piece is the audit process, which is something that we started back in 2010, 2011 school year. So we've been doing it for about 10 years. And the audit is something that we do both internally and externally, but it's something that we drive, and we look systematically each year at a different part of our program and then try to understand ways that that program is really thriving and doing well, and then we talk about ways in which we can strengthen that program. And so those are the two processes that I want to take a moment to go through. So first of all, the accreditation. So we were actually accredited back in 2019-20, and the accreditation finished like about 6 weeks before we went into lockdown. So it was one of these things. It was a real high for the school at the end of that process, and then immediately after that, we were trying to scramble like the rest of the world to figure out what to do. But so I wanted to take a moment because it got lost, I think, a little bit, our accreditation process because of COVID. And so the way the accreditation process works, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read the graphic on the screen, but the accreditation process was like a two-year process, and it starts with an exhaustive study internally about all parts of our program and all parts of our operations. And so we spent about 9 to 12 months really looking intensively at our program, at our operations, and we created a very lengthy self-study. At the end of that process, that self-study was shared with a group of educators, mostly school heads, but some also non-school heads, leaders from around the state of California. And that group came in January of 2020 to visit the school, and they spent 4 days on campus. And during that time, their job was to see, did what we share in our report, did that make sense? Did that reflect back in their experience on the time on campus? They met with parents, they met with employees, they met with students, they visited lots of classrooms. They spent an exhaustive deep dive into who we are and what we say we do. And at the end of that, they do two things. One, they provide us back a report which includes a series of major recommendations, and then they suggest a term of accreditation, which is ultimately approved by the CAIS Elementary Board of Standards. And so within those accreditation terms, there are a number of categories. The top category is what they typically call a 7 clear, and that means you get a 7-year term of accreditation, and there's no piece in the middle other than you report back to them, but there's no visit, there's nothing else. then you can move on down from there. So then there's other versions of that where you have a group that comes and revisits you halfway. There's other versions where they add other stipulations. So about 40 to 50% of schools receive that 7 clear standing. And so we were very proud and happy that at the end of that process that we received that 7 clear. And I wanted to say a little bit about what some of the things that they remarked on about our school. And again, this is a group of outside educators. So one of the things that they noted is that everyone, and they called out junior actually in this, but students and faculty to junior and the Epicurean team, they live out our vision and values in ways that are immediately visible to visitors to our campus. So that was something they noticed. They also noted that we have a community in which adults ask questions, share ideas, and engage in exchanges that reflect an authentic effort to hear and be heard. We are a genuinely collaborative culture, and we listen to each other and learn from each other. They saw students running, falling down, taking risks, using their voice. They're kind, and that they're leaders of their own learning journey. And that last part is so core to the Hillbrook experience. Even our youngest students, JK and K, we are finding ways to put them in charge of their own learning experience, to equip them with the ability to be the driver of that experience. And then they talked about our faculty, and they described a fabulous faculty that challenges students to be their best, the teachers that know and value each child. And I love this language. They recognize when to step in and push, and when to step back and allow for productive struggle. And they talk about the learning experience being deliberately messy. And I've loved since they shared that expression, the idea of a deliberately messy, which I think is right. Learning is not this straightforward process, and we sometimes think it is, and it's not. It's a very messy. They're growing up. You're watching your children grow up, and so recognizing that, and as adults honoring that and valuing that in the learning experience. So then at the end of that, they gave us 5 major recommendations, which over the next 7 years will serve as a focus. It's not the only focus, but will serve as a focus for some of the strategic work we're doing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work we've already started doing on some of those 5 recommendations. But just very briefly, those 5 recommendations, the first one was to develop further curriculum documentation to provide clarity around grade level expectations and learning outcomes. The second one was to build upon and enhance what they saw as kind of key mission-based programs, the work we're doing in DEI, in Reaching Beyond, and the Scott Center for Social Entrepreneurship. They encouraged us to design and implement a professional growth model or a new professional growth model for our faculty. They encouraged us to look at our long-term finances and focus on endowment and major gift fundraising. And then they encouraged us strongly to continue exploring the idea of a high school. So as you hear those, I won't hit on all of these, but you'll hear that a number of those things are things that have been major priorities over the last few years. So first and foremost, this past year, under the leadership of Director of Teaching and Learning, Ilse Doman, we launched our cohesive curriculum guide. And if you haven't seen this, I encourage you. It's on the website. It's available. It's something actually that a lot of new families applying to the school have remarked on because it is so detailed and thoughtful. So it includes a philosophy statement tied to each discipline, as well as philosophy statements tied to DEI education, social impact education, and SEL. And then it has grade-by-grade learning outcomes. And so I encourage you to look at that, and this is what guides the work that the teachers are doing day in and day out through the years, and ensuring that there's that continuity as your children are growing up and going through the school. I also want to just quickly mention that one of the pieces that we added this year to try to provide greater insight into our curriculum are the curriculum connections in Hillbrook Happenings. So I hope that some people might have noticed those, but we've added those in the Hillbrook Happenings to try to give to draw connections between the curriculum guide and the learning outcomes, and then the work that is happening in the classroom each day. Another area, they talked about was really strengthening these core signature programs. And one of the ways that's shown up in particular over the last few years has been an increasing integration of social impact and DEI. And increasingly we're talking about DEI-JA. So it's diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and action. And the JA is kind of the action arm of our DEI. And so a few things that I just wanted to highlight. Recently, a great example of this was a recent project in the 7th grade about biomimicry. And so for those who don't know, biomimicry is essentially the bridge between biology and design. And it's the notion of using like nature-inspired design to tackle really complex problems. And so the best example that I've heard is Velcro, which apparently somebody had burrs on their dog in the 1940s, and they used that concept to design Velcro. So our students participated in a design challenge around biomimicry, which they chose a sustainable development goal. So that's something that for particularly those of you who have older children hear that a lot. We talk about the sustainable development, the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They took an SDG and then they tied that to the design of some kind of product. And so, for example, a number of groups were involved with trying to grow and design plant-based leather. You should ask, if you have a 7th grader or if you know of a 7th grader, you should ask them more about that. This project then led to a trip to Big Sur, where they also then were able to spend time learning about water preservation and purification systems. And I mention this because this program was something that happened both in science class, it happened in the Reach Beyond block, and then it happened as part of one of these class trips. And that's the goal that we're looking for as we're integrating the educational program into these various DEI and social impact experiences. So another place that you see this is in student-led community projects, and there's 3 numbers that are helpful to know for this slide. So the first number is 60, the second number is 1,000, and the third number is 5,527. So 60 refers to the number of baskets that Soraya Johansson and a large group of maybe many of you, I don't know who was there, but a number of people were in early October on this stage putting together baskets as part of the Taste of Home project. And so the Taste of Home project is something that Soraya did as part of her social impact and leadership project, and it really tied into 2 key questions, which again, hopefully people have heard as they've been at Hillbrook. What matters to you and what are you going to do about it? And so what mattered to Soraya in part was the refugee experience, and her mother and family were refugees from Iran in the late 1970s, and actually since she's been here at Hillbrook has talked for years about various refugee experiences, often tied to her own family. She was then inspired last summer as the situation was developing in Afghanistan, and as a number of people were leaving and becoming refugees out of Afghanistan, of what could she do in this moment that might be able to help. And so she also is really drawn and inspired by food. And her family, there's a lot of cooking and deep cultural ties to cooking in her family. So what she designed with the help of many others were these Taste of Home boxes, which included beloved spices and flavors and foods that are from Afghanistan that the refugees weren't able to get as they were arriving, or were hard to get as they were arriving here in the States. And so they put together those boxes and then they distribute them through the IRC up in Sacramento. And so again, that's one example of a way that students were able to lead a project that a number of people were able to be involved with. So the second number I said was 1,000. That refers to, and actually I think it's more than 1,000 pounds that the 5th and 6th grade raised as part of a food drive, which was part of a broader Reach Beyond block learning experience. And so that Reach Beyond block involved learning about and visiting with Second Harvest Food Bank. It involved an activity in which they were given a limited budget and asked to try to shop for like a certain period of time of like trying to buy food. So replicating what it would be like to have limited resources and trying to buy food. They connected, some of you may remember Paul DeMarco, who was a longtime teacher here at Hillbrook School, who started a nonprofit called No Time to Waste. And that nonprofit works to redistribute food from restaurants to help it get into shelters. They met with Paul and learned a little bit about the work that he was doing. And then in the end, after they had studied all of these things, they then put together a food drive and raised over 1,000 pounds, which they were able to donate to a group called Center for Farm Worker Families and to Paul's organization, No Time to Waste. And the last number, 5,527, Kalen Dugan, who's one of our 8th graders, like Soraya, but for his social impact and leadership project, what he cared about was understanding how to support families in need. That's what mattered to him. And so his mother, who's a public health doctor, and he connected with the Valley Medical Center, and they discovered that one of the greatest needs at the Valley Medical Center are diapers. And that, and if it doesn't take long as a parent to remember, like the number of diapers you go through a day and the cost of diapers. And so that's a really big need for families of low-income families. And so Kaylin was able to organize a diaper drive, brought in more than 5,000 diapers, and was able to deliver that with a large group of students. All of these projects are that example of the connection of education and the connection of reaching beyond, like how these things intersect for students in very real ways. And then the other piece, right, is it's how students are able to lead these efforts with their peers. All of these projects involved lots of kids, even though in certain cases 1 or 2 students were driving them. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to the number of ways that families have been able to help us celebrate important traditions and holidays. And this has been at at Flag. Hopefully people have seen a number of flags this year. We've used that as an opportunity for children to come up and talk a little bit about how they celebrated a recent holiday or a recent tradition with their family. Some of the ones that we mentioned on here, Nowruz was celebrated. A number of families came in and did presentations with younger students. Lunar New Year, we've long celebrated Lunar New Year as a school, and consistently families have come together to help us celebrate that. Dia de los Muertos back in November, and then Diwali, which is a Hindu celebration. And so, again, these are just a few examples of ways that families have also been able to really participate and work with us on engaging with kids and learning more about family traditions. So I talked a little bit about accreditation. The other way as a school that we really try to consistently find ways to reflect on who we are and what we're doing, and find ways to both recognize our strengths but also look at ways to improve, is through the program audit process. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we started this back in the 2010-2011 school year, and the idea was to create a process where we could systematically go through and review each of our disciplines: English language arts, math, science, history, over time, and so that you'd have time to review all of your disciplines through time, but in a way that was manageable, because it's hard to do it all at once. And so like to make sure it was systematic, and then it would repeat. And so at this point, we have English language arts, science, math. All 3 of those have had 2 audits, and so we've had multiple audits of some of our departments. Very briefly, the way the audit process works is we bring together a team of teachers. And that includes teachers typically who are in that discipline, and also some teachers who are not, so to try to bring in some outside perspectives. That group comes together. It's led by Director of Teaching and Learning Ilse Doman. That group comes together and they set up a series of guiding questions, and then they start to gather data. And in a minute I'll talk more about some of the data that we gather. Once they've gathered that data, they synthesize the findings. They prepare a report. We share it out with the community. So for example, this year we are auditing science. And so towards probably the early part of next year, but potentially before the end of this year, but certainly the early part of next year, we'll be sharing out that report. And then they create a series of recommendations and take action. So one of the examples, literacy was a program that we did several years ago. And for all of you who are in our junior kindergarten through 2nd grade, hopefully you have noticed that we have a really cohesive and strong literacy program, which has come out of the work of that recent audit. And in particular, implemented a really consistent approach to phonics. And then the piece that people might have seen even more is the use of the adaptive assessment tools, such as Lexia, which is a term I think a lot of our 1st and 2nd grade families in particular recognize. So that directly came out of the work of teachers recognizing that this was an area that we could strengthen, really reaching out and understanding best practices from other schools, and then pulling together to strengthen our own program. We have written about that in several Hillbrook happenings, and so if you're interested, you can go and take a deeper dive into that. And then finally, I wanted to mention that consulting, one of the things that's happened out of this is we are one of the only schools that does this process, and increasingly other schools have been asking us like how you do it. And so Ilsa and Associate Head of School Colleen Schilly have done some consulting work with other schools, And I mentioned that this is not something that every school necessarily does, and so we're proud that we do this, and we recognize. To me, we're really leading with that humility to recognize that we always have room to grow, and so we wanted to build a really systematic way to make sure that we can keep doing that. So I said I'd mentioned something about data sources. So there's lots of data that we gather, both tied to audits and then also just tied to our annual evaluation of various parts of our program. But so some of that data, standardized assessments. Tomorrow night, if you're interested in knowing more about the ERB, particularly if you have a 3rd through 8th grader and or if you have a particularly 3rd or 4th grader perhaps and you're new to that process, all of our students go through ERBs, or 3rd through 8th graders go through ERBs in the next few weeks. And that's a standardized assessment that is does two things. One, it enables us to assess kind of strengths and areas for improvement in our program. And then it also, obviously, with individual students, enables us to kind of track growth over time. And so, if you have questions about ERBs, I always encourage you to reach out to Ilsa, Amy, Colleen, Heather Stinnett. All of them are well equipped to talk you through, particularly if you're interested in it tied to your individual child. We also look at what our 8th graders do after they leave Hillbrook. And so we track high school data, we track placement data, so we also talk about what courses our 8th graders take after they graduate. We do surveys, kind of tracking like what did they think went really well at Hillbrook, what are things that they think that we could improve. So that's another source of data for us. We do surveys of our families. So next fall we will have our biannual all community survey. So we do that, and then we also do some smaller surveys as well. And then we also spend lots of time in classrooms, watching teachers and evaluating teachers and really, both looking at how we're delivering a program and areas for growth. So one thing I wanted to take a quick mention about, although this slide will, we won't be showing this slide nearly as often in the years to come, but we remain very proud of our high school acceptance rates, and so you're looking at the class of 2022, and so this just came in, but this is the data you have in front of you is from the past 5 years, and so it's a rolling 5-year average, and what you'll see, and this has been consistent for a long time, is that our students get into schools at a much higher rate than the typical student gets into these schools. There's an advantage coming from Hillbrook. And so, for example, Bellarmine on here, if you're looking at Bellarmine, about 80% of our students get into Bellarmine. Typically, it's about 50% of students who get into Bellarmine. 70% of students are getting into St. Francis, about 50% again. So there's an advantage going to Hillbrook when you're applying to these schools. They want Hillbrook students. That advantage is also true at our peer independent schools. And so if you look at, for example, and two things you'll notice, independent schools are more competitive than the local Catholic schools in terms of their acceptance rates. So for example, all of these schools are at 25% or lower. But even here, we're outpacing those schools. The typical, so Harker, a little over 30%, Nueva, over about 45%. So again, our students are getting in at or above the rates of other students applying to these schools, and it's because they know us, and they want our students. They know the kind of students that are going to show up, and what are those students? They're self-confident, they're self-directed learners, they know themselves, and they have those Hillbrook core values that are ingrained in them from the time they first walk on this campus, whether that's in junior kindergarten or in 7th grade. And then just quickly, every year we have a broad range of high schools that students are going to. This year there's 14 different high schools that the class of 2022 are going to. We have a handful of boarding schools, Kate, Santa Catalina, the Lawrenceville School. We have a handful of other independent schools. And then this year, actually, one of the largest groups, which has been increasingly true the last few years, is we have 10 students going to Los Gatos High School, and then also a handful going to some of the other local public schools. So, I'll say, one of the things that this data is the number of kids going to public schools has gone up. It has been one of those indicators to us that perhaps a Hillbrook High School might be something that people are looking for. So briefly, looking ahead to the next year, I wanted to share a few things. First of all, a couple of staffing announcements, which these are not new, but Melissa Bamberg is here. I'm actually looking, and she's like, wait, I'm up on the screen. So Melissa Bamberg will be our new Director of Enrollment Management. And Melissa currently is finishing up. She's been at the Avenues, the World School, which is a brand new K-12 going into downtown San Jose. And then prior to that, she spent 10 years at Sacred Heart Schools and up in Atherton. And so big K-12. So we are excited to have Melissa joining us, and particularly as we look to launch this high school, excited for as she's going to help us make sense of what it's like to become a K-12. Gully, as I mentioned yesterday in the Hillbrook Happenings, it was written in the Hillbrook Happening, Gulliver Lavage, you can raise, for those who don't know Gulliver is our Director of DEI, and he will be the Director of DEI and the interim head of middle school next year. That was, Gully came from Woodside Priory before here and has a long experience as like a teacher and an administrator at another great 612. When we decided to bring Gully into that role, we did a search. We had some strong candidates, but we didn't have anybody who felt like just quite the right fit. And I know and trust Gully deeply. He's great with kids and he knows our program, and so it made a lot of sense to kind of slow that process down, ask Gully to step in for the year, and we'll restart that process in the fall. We're confident that we'll find a great person to take over a year from now. We also, and I don't know if Kelly's here, but so we also hired and created a new role, which is a literacy and a challenge coach. And so Kelly Skolton, who has played a number of roles at Hillbrook. She was a librarian, third grade teacher, associate head of lower school. She's taken the last year off. And was ready to come back, and we had this brand new role, which felt like the perfect role for Kelly. And so this role will do two things. One is to support lower school literacy, as I was just describing. We've done a lot of work in the JK 2-3 space around lower school literacy, and Kelly has a real expertise in that. And then the other side of this is something new to us, and that is supporting challenge. And what we are looking for is somebody to help us provide high quality enrichment for students who are ready for more challenge. And so Kelly's going to be working with teachers to really help them provide that challenge. And so she'll be doing some work with individual students, but mostly she'll be working with staff to help them provide those experiences. And so we're really excited to see what Kelly can help us do in that space. A few other curricular initiatives that I want to mention. We will be recommitting to one core lower school math program. For those who've been around for a while, know there's a little bit of a swing that happens back and forth with some of these kinds of programs. And so about 9 or 10 years ago, we adopted Singapore math. Over the interim years, we have had a wide range of other programs that we have brought in that have really served students well. And we've gotten to the point now where there's enough of those different programs that it made sense to say, you know what, it might be time to kind of recommit to a program and really kind of create a little more cohesion in the way that the math is being taught in the JK through 4. And so we're excited about that. Teachers are working with ILSA and others to come up with that, to come up with a program for next year. We're also looking at moving towards a competency-based assessment system, and then that's, as I said, grades 6 through 12. So the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is referenced here, is a group that's been working on reimagining what the high school transcript looks like and what high school assessment looks like. And that process is feeding its way back into middle schools. And with competency-based learning, and you'll hear a lot more about this in the next couple of years, but with competency-based learning, it's an increased level of transparency for students, and it's really helping students have a more complete understanding of what they're learning. It's a much more holistic approach to grading and it is something that schools across the country, really top independent schools across the country, have been talking about, and we're really excited with the arrival of a high school that this is the moment, as we're going to be designing a high school transcript, to think about how that then plays out from at least 6-12 and perhaps even younger. And that, of course, is, as everybody knows, and as we have been sharing, we are launching a high school in the fall of 2023. This is a decision that was long coming. We spent, this has been in the water for years. Ever since I arrived at Hillbrook, there were people who would ask about, have you ever thought about having a high school? 4 years ago, we got serious about this conversation. We knew that people were consistently asking us, and we said, we need to figure out what it would involve to do this. And so we spent a couple of years studying the question. We visited lots of schools, including schools that had JK8s that had added high schools. We also just visited like excellent high schools. We visited a handful of JK12s. And we really came to create a design and a model which we truly believe in, and we think is the logical extension of what happens here on our lower school campus. And as it says on this slide, I think increasingly, and this was a comment, Tesha Poe, who was a former employee, board member, longtime friend of the school, fabulous person. During one of the early meetings, Tesha made the comment that, why should we do this? Because our students deserve to have this kind of experience. And we have, as the longer we went through this process, the more we came to believe that yes, our students deserve it, but we also think other students deserve to have this kind of experience. And the reality is there is no high school in the immediate area that is like what we're describing and imagining for Hillbrook High School. So what is that? We are envisioning a high school that aligns with other great independent schools up the peninsula, in San Francisco, and around the Bay. And so some of the names that people may know, Castellea, Woodside Priory, Menlo, Nueva, the urban school. And so what do all these schools have in common? They're small, and they're smaller than any of the options we have around here. Like the ability to really be known as a student and to be in small classes all the way through high school. They have higher ACT and SAT scores than either the Catholic schools or the public schools. These are the best schools in the Bay Area. And they, as we describe it, they really thread this needle between a rigorous academic experience and engaged, thoughtful young adults committed to changing the world. So they're threading that needle. The same experience that we're providing here on the JK8, we see happening on a high school campus. So the other thing that we also shared recently, but I do want to bring back, and Mike is not here, unfortunately, but Mike Peller will be our new head of the upper school, our founding head of the upper school. And Mike was very involved at Nueva School in the early years, and currently is an associate head of school at a boarding school back east. And he brings a great deal of experience. He has spent a lot of time working on the Mastery Transcript Consortium, what I was mentioning a few minutes ago, and just has a lot of understanding of high schools and what will be involved. And I loved this quote he wrote in his cover letter to us. He said, "There has never been a more exciting time to be teaching, learning, and leading in schools. Similarly, there has never been such a compelling need to reimagine what high school can and must be. To reimagine and create an innovative model alongside an existing remarkable school is what draws me to the founding upper school head position at Hillbrook." So last thing I want to mention is next year, we are going to be embarking on a new strategic planning process. And we have a long history of strategic plans. We've had two very successful strategic plans during my tenure. Vision 2015, which led to the creation of the resident teacher program, led to the creation of the audit process, a reimagined schedule, and then Vision 2020, more recently, which led to the Scott Center for Social Entrepreneurship, the extensive work in DEI, a whole host of things that have we've really created meaningful change over an extended period of time. So we've been a little, Vision 2020, we obviously were prepared at the end of 2020 to move into a new strategic planning process, and then something happened. And so we've not moved into a strategic planning process following March of 2020. But we're ready now, and we know that the community is ready. And so we're really excited next year to move into this process. So Colleen Schilly is going to help us guide this process. And you'll hear a lot more about it. But there'll be lots of opportunity, as with every process we've had, there'll be lots of opportunity for parents to get involved and to share your thoughts and to share your ideas. There'll be a survey, but there'll also be smaller community gatherings where you can come and join. Historically, these have been really fun events. They're a great opportunity to kind of come together and imagine a future for the school. And so we're really excited at this key moment as we're launching this high school. It is so important to us that we're thinking about the future of the JK-12 and thinking about this core JK-8 campus and what does that look like, as well as the work that we know we'll be doing to build the new high school. So I will be excited to have people involved. And so finally, if you want to learn more about any of these things, I would encourage you to visit some of the tables that will be behind me as I finish this presentation. And so there'll be a teaching and learning table. If you want to learn a little bit more about program and the student experience, there will be a Scott Center and DEI-JA table to learn about social entrepreneurship and DEI programming for students and families. There will be a high school table to learn more about our launch in 2023. A hub table if you want to learn how we are using this extraordinary new space. A financial model table to learn about tuition, flexible tuition, and philanthropy. A strategic plan table if you want to share early ideas about the school's future, and then an HSPC table to learn about how you can get involved. So thank you very much for joining this evening for this event. It's so nice to have people together. Please do stay for a while, go ask it at the tables, but also have something more to drink, have some more food. I don't know about the rest of you, but just every time I get a chance to get together with a group this year, it's felt good just to be together in community. So thank you again for all who are on the screen. I hope that you had a good, enjoyed the presentation, and thanks everybody. Have a great evening.